Why are you always on about women, Stan?
I want to be one.
What?
I want to be a woman. I want you all to call me Loretta.
What?
It's my right as a man.
Life of Brian wasn't just a comedy, it was the heresy no one saw coming. But behind the beards and sandals, the chaos was biblical. One Beatle paid for the whole thing and showed up as a cameo. Entire towns banned the film, even the ones without a single theater. And their leading man? He quit drinking, nailed the role, then treated the crew like patients. These are 20 weird facts about Monty Python's Life of Brian. And buried in the rubble, a farewell scene so explosive, it left nothing sacred. Raise your goblet. This wasn't blasphemy, it was brilliance. Number 1. It was over. EMI Films had pulled the plug just days before cameras rolled. The subject matter? Too risky, too blasphemous, too Python. The crew was stunned, the shoot was booked, the cast was ready. And then, out of nowhere, came a Beatle. George Harrison believed in the script, so much so he mortgaged his house just to fund it. He founded a brand new company, Handmade Films, with one goal: get Life of Brian made. It was the most expensive movie ticket ever bought. That's how Eric Idle described it. Because Harrison didn't just fund it, he wanted a part in it. Look closely, in the middle of a chaotic crowd scene as followers shove and shout and scramble for a glimpse. George Harrison is there, quietly trying to push through. No lines, no music, just a quiet cameo from the man who saved the movie. Without George Harrison, there is no Life of Brian. There's just a script in a drawer, and a world without one of the boldest comedies ever made. Number 2. It began as a joke at a party. Eric Idle, half drunk and riding the wave of Holy Grail success, muttered a fake title to a reporter: Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory. The others laughed, then paused, then wondered, what if? For a moment, that was the film, a full-on war epic starring Jesus, played straight and bloody. But the deeper they went, the more they realized they didn't want to mock Jesus. They wanted to mock everything around him: the followers, the factions, the bureaucracy of belief. So they scrapped the title, but not the energy. The satire sharpened, the target shifted, and the result was Life of Brian, a film not about Christ, but about the chaos of those who misinterpret him. And Lust for Glory? That joke title still lingers in Python lore, a reminder of how close the comedy came to firebombing history.
No one is to stone anyone until I blow this whistle. Do you understand? Even, and I want to make this absolutely clear, even if they do say Jehovah.
Number 3. The backlash didn't wait for screenings. It began with whispers, turned into protests, and soon became an international firestorm. From New York to Dublin, Life of Brian was condemned as blasphemy. Religious leaders from different faiths, priests, rabbis, bishops, stood shoulder to shoulder, calling for it to be pulled from theaters. Some had never even seen it. They just knew it had to be offensive. Ireland banned it outright. Norway slapped it with a warning. And in Britain, the absurdity reached peak levels. 11 councils banned the movie, even though they didn't have a single cinema. No screens, no projectors, just fear. It was the kind of overreaction the Pythons would have written as satire, except it was real. And ironically, that outrage lit the fuse. The controversy became free publicity. Viewers flooded theaters out of curiosity, and the film exploded at the box office. They tried to silence it. Instead, they made it The movie was done. Theaters were packed. Critics were split, some crying genius, others crying sacrilege. But one thing was certain: Life of Brian was never going to air on British TV. Both the BBC and ITV, the UK's two broadcasting giants, declined to show it. Not because of the content, because of the climate. Executives feared the outrage. Letters from religious groups poured in. Complaints were filed by people who hadn't even seen the film. It was guilt by reputation. So for years, the only way to see Life of Brian was on VHS or in a midnight theater. It became an underground classic, not by design, but by censorship. And in the end, that silence spoke louder than any broadcast ever could. Number 5. The desert was real. The stones were ancient, but the holiness, that had already been filmed. When Life of Brian went into production, the Pythons didn't have the budget to build sprawling biblical sets from scratch, so they did something brilliantly blasphemous. They borrowed the leftovers from Jesus of Nazareth, Franco Zeffirelli's 1977 religious epic. The same arches, the same temples, the same dusty courtyards where solemn miracles once unfolded on screen, now echoed with fart jokes and songs about crucifixion. But it wasn't just the architecture they inherited. The extras came too. Many of the locals who had played humble shepherds, disciples, and weeping townspeople for Zeffirelli returned. Only this time, they stood watching Monty Python run around in sandals and fake beards, yelling nonsense in Latin. The contrast was jarring. One day, sacred reverence. The next, British absurdity. One baffled extra reportedly muttered, "This didn't happen last time." And just like that, in the shadow of holy cinema, Life of Brian found its edge. Not by mocking religion, but by confronting how we perform it. Number 6. It should have been simple. Brian appears nude at the window. Crowd gasps. Cut to the next gag. But there was a problem. A historically awkward one. Graham Chapman, playing a first-century Jewish man, wasn't circumcised. And the camera angle? Unforgiving. So what did they do? Prosthetics? CGI? Makeup magic? Nope. Chapman just grabbed a rubber band, tugged, wrapped, scene saved. It was low-budget problem-solving in its purest form, and the most Monty Python solution imaginable. Number 7. It was already the weirdest scene in the movie. Brian falls off a tower and lands in a flying saucer. But behind the scenes, it was even stranger. That one scene was shot in London while the rest of the film was in Tunisia, and that presented a legal issue. Graham Chapman, a UK citizen living in the US, couldn't be in England for more than 24 hours, or he'd owe massive taxes, so they rushed. Chapman flew in, got yanked across a spaceship set, delivered his lines, and flew right back out, all in one tax-dodging day. Call it comedy, with a countdown clock. Number 8. He wasn't on the call sheet. He wasn't even supposed to be there. British comedy legend Spike Milligan was simply on vacation, visiting old World War II battlefields in Tunisia. While strolling near the Life of Brian set, he ran into the Pythons, who instantly threw him into costume. No audition, no lines, no planning. Suddenly, Milligan was on screen, waving his arms, shouting nonsense, and blending right into the biblical mayhem. It was a blink and you'll miss it moment. But to Python fans, it was like two comedy worlds colliding, spontaneously and perfectly. Number 9. On Holy Grail, Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones shared the director's chair, and it nearly tore them apart. Two Terrys, two egos, two clashing visions. Gilliam, the visual perfectionist, obsessed with shots, lighting, and fantasy scale. Jones, the performance wrangler, locked in on timing, delivery, and comic rhythm. The result? Chaos behind the camera. Scenes were re-edited behind each other's backs. Arguments spilled into post-production. As Eric Idle later put it, it was like one body being pulled by two heads. So for Life of Brian, they made a pact. One director, one vision. Gilliam would focus on production design, shaping the gritty ancient look of Judea, building the world from sand and stone. Jones would direct the performances, guiding actors, shaping tone, and keeping the comedy grounded. It worked. No power struggle, no sabotage. Each Python leaned into their strength, and for once, the chaos stayed where it belonged, on screen.
I have a very great friend in Rome called Biggus Dickus. Silence! You will find yourself in gladiator school very quickly with rotten behavior like that. Can I go now, sir? Ah! Wait till Biggus Dickus hears of this. Wait! Take him away! Fighting rabid wild animals within a week. Yes, sir.
Number 10. There's one scene in Life of Brian that still baffles new viewers. Brian, about to fall to his death, is suddenly rescued by a giant alien spaceship. It makes no sense. It's never explained, and it's never mentioned again. So where did it come from? Terry Gilliam. He wanted a special effects sequence, just to flex. So he convinced the others that right in the middle of their biblical satire, there should be a random glorious UFO chase. It derails the plot for a full minute, but the animation is incredible. And the punchline? Pure Python. Absurd, pointless, and unforgettable. Number 11. It's the anthem everyone remembers. Always look on the bright side of life. But believe it or not, the other Pythons nearly scrapped it. Eric Idle wrote it as a joke, a light, ironic tune to close out the crucifixion. But when he brought it to early script meetings, the reaction was cold. No laughs, no nods, just awkward silence. It wasn't until they played it during a lunch break on set that the crew started whistling along. Someone said, "Play it again." Then they all joined in. That moment flipped the verdict. The song stayed. And decades later, it's been played at funerals, football matches, and royal events, all because a satire about death dared to end on a smile. Number 12. Bernie Delfont wanted nothing to do with Life of Brian. He pulled out late in production, terrified of the religious backlash. So what did the Pythons do? They turned him into the punchline.
I said to him, Bernie, I said, they'll never make that money back.
It was their way of immortalizing the man who doubted them and making sure every audience heard it loud and clear. Irony, Python style. Bernie walked away from the project, but couldn't escape the credits. Number 13. They weren't just filming on sets. Some locations were real ancient ruins, carved from centuries of history. The crew promised to be careful, but comedy doesn't always tread lightly. During the UFO crash scene, Terry Gilliam's effects team scorched part of a historic stone wall with paint and black powder. He panicked. That night, a secret team snuck back, armed with brushes, dirt, and water, to cover it up before the locals noticed. They were filming jokes in sandals, but they knew they were walking on sacred ground. Number 14. It started with a joke. In the most unholy of places, Amsterdam. While promoting Holy Grail across Europe, the Pythons were huddled in a hotel bar, trading drinks and absurd ideas. That's when the seed of their next controversial project was planted. A biblical satire that would challenge conventions. The others cracked up, but the laugh didn't fade, because behind the joke was something bigger. They realized the Bible wasn't just scripture, it was ripe for satire, mob mentality, political hypocrisy, prophets misheard and misunderstood, and the idea stuck. Months later, they regrouped in Barbados, not for divine inspiration, but because George Harrison had a house there. With rum in hand and surf in earshot, they outlined the script barefoot on the beach. The Caribbean sun helped, but the writing was anything but relaxed. They tore through scenes with the same irreverent bite that had made Holy Grail a cult hit. And when it came time to shoot, they went to Tunisia, where Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth had just wrapped. They weren't building a biblical epic, but they sure weren't building new sets either. So this blasphemous comedy was born in Amsterdam, written in Barbados, and shot on holy ground. No wonder it sparked a religious riot.
They bled us white, bastards. They've taken everything we had. From our fathers, and from our fathers' fathers.
And from our fathers' 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 fathers.
All right, Stan, don't labour the point. And what have they ever given us in return? The aqueduct? Oh, yeah, they did give us that.
Number 15. The man who played Brian had a secret weapon, discipline, which is ironic, because Graham Chapman was the wildest of the Pythons off-screen. Brilliant, yes, but unpredictable. By the end of Holy Grail, his drinking had become a serious problem. Missed cues, slurred lines, unsteady feet. So when it came time to play the accidental messiah in Life of Brian, Chapman did something radical. He quit. Cold turkey, no halfway, no excuses. He gave up alcohol entirely, determined to prove that he could lead the film without falling apart. And then, fate threw him a curveball. They were filming in Tunisia, in blistering desert heat. The crew was melting, cast members were fainting. Foodborne illness swept the set. Chapman, who'd trained as a doctor before comedy ever entered the picture, stepped in. He wasn't just delivering lines anymore. He was checking pulses, handing out advice, treating stomach bugs, and quietly holding the shoot together behind the scenes. He showed up as the lead and became the caretaker. The irony? The guy who once couldn't hold his drink ended up holding everyone else upright. Number 16. From the outside, it looked like blasphemy. From the inside, it was something very different. Before they ever wrote a scene, the Pythons made one thing clear. Jesus was off limits, not because they feared backlash, but because they respected him. They watched documentaries, read the Gospels, and came to the same quiet decision. Jesus wasn't funny. His words were sincere. His message was clear. He wasn't a figure of ridicule. He was a figure of peace. So they drew a line. Life of Brian wouldn't make fun of the man himself. It would satirize everything around him. The mobs, the politics, the hysteria, the blind obedience. As Eric Idle put it, what he's saying isn't mockable. It's very decent stuff. That choice sharpened the film's blade, because instead of cheap shots, the satire had purpose. Instead of mocking faith, it exposed fanaticism. And decades later, that restraint is what gave Life of Brian its power. They didn't go after divinity. They went after absurdity. And they nailed it, to the wall. Number 17. As the protests mounted and bands rolled in, the Pythons weren't surprised, but they were frustrated by the accusations, because most of the loudest critics hadn't even seen the film. Terry Jones described it as the history of the church in 3 minutes. Eric Idle said they weren't mocking Christ, just the people who misused his teachings. To them, the real crime wasn't blasphemy. It was the unwillingness to engage with what the film was actually saying. So they fired back, not with defense, but with clarity. It's not blasphemy, it's heresy. And in true Python fashion, they wore the outrage like a badge of honor.
Anybody else? else feel like a little giggle when I mention my friend, Dickus? What about you? Do you find it risible when I say the name Dickus? Dickus? He has a wife, you know. You know what she's called? Incontinentia. Incontinentia buttocks.
Number 18. When your movie gets banned across countries, how do you respond? If you're Monty Python, you turn it into a tagline. In Sweden, Life of Brian hit theaters under a new title. The film's so funny, it was banned in Norway. Not only did it poke fun at the absurdity of censorship, it made the controversy part of the joke. And it worked. Audiences showed up not despite the bans, but because of them. Proof that satire sells, especially when it's been told not to. Number 19. It shouldn't have worked. The Pythons lost their studio days before filming. Religious groups were already calling it blasphemy before they'd seen a single frame. And once it hit theaters, cities banned it, countries banned it, even towns without theaters banned it. And yet, the film exploded. Life of Brian cost around $4 million to make, much of it fronted by George Harrison, who literally mortgaged his house to save the movie. Everyone assumed it would flop. Too weird, too risky, too offensive. But something strange happened. The backlash became buzz. The protest became publicity. And suddenly, the film was the movie everyone had to see. Audiences showed up in droves, laughing, debating, rewatching. It grossed over $20 million in its initial run, multiplying its budget fivefold and launching it straight into cult legend. All the censorship, all the panic, it didn't kill the film. It made it immortal. Number 20. Decades later, the arguments hadn't died down. So BBC4 created Holy Flying Circus, a surreal, fictionalized look at the backlash that followed Life of Brian. It wasn't a dry documentary. It was a strange, layered reimagining of how satire, faith, and fear collided. The film depicted interviews, debates, and internal Pythonesque chaos, stirring up the same questions all over again. Was it disrespect or righteous rebellion? Even after 30 years, Life of Brian was still doing what it did best, starting uncomfortable conversations with a smile. Bonus fact, leave it to Monty Python to turn even death into a punchline. When Graham Chapman passed away in 1989, the troupe didn't mourn him with silence. They roasted him, literally. At a 1998 Python reunion at the Aspen Comedy Festival, the surviving members gathered on stage for a tribute. A solemn urn sat beside them, until suddenly, they knocked it over. Ashes spilled, gasps echoed. Then came the chaos. Eric Idle shouted, John Cleese cursed. And in true Python fashion, they revealed the whole thing was a bit, complete with a second ceremony where Chapman's actual ashes were loaded into a cannon and blasted into the sky. Not buried, not scattered, launched. Because if you were a Python, your send-off wasn't a eulogy. It was one final gag. One final irreverent, explosive, unforgettable joke for the man who once played Brian and refused to stay grounded. Life of Brian was never meant to play it safe. It challenged institutions. It confused censors. It made the faithful furious, and then made them laugh anyway. It proved that blasphemy isn't always disrespect. Sometimes it's honesty in disguise. So if this one made you uncomfortable, or made you laugh harder than you expected, drop a comment. Tell us what bold, ridiculous classic we should resurrect next. Because 2,000 years later, we're still laughing at the same mob, still asking the same questions, still searching for meaning in the madness. Comedy doesn't just push boundaries, it exposes the truth hiding behind them.